begins, I'd like to pass along a couple of notes about the system we are using today. This meeting will be broadcast live on the Rules Committee website beginning in a moment. In a moment, I will mute all participants other than Chairman McGovern. All participants are asked to keep themselves muted when not actively engaging in the discussion, which should help limit echoes or other disruptions. In instances in which members or witnesses yield back or otherwise conclude their turn speaking but do not remember to remute themselves, I will do so to limit inadvertent background audio. Members and witnesses are responsible for unmuting themselves anytime they wish to be heard. With that, we are ready to begin. Chairman McGovern, please count down from 5 so that the system displays your audio. Pause briefly while the stream begins and then start the proceeding.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Rules Committee will come to order. This is our 11th event as part of our work developing a plan to end hunger in America. And I have to tell you, something that has come up again and again, whether during roundtables like this or on the ground in communities all across the country, is the federal benefits cliff. I think there's an assumption out there that if you're not steeped in these issues, that as someone gets back on their feet and makes more money, the amount of food assistance from programs like SNAP goes down. That would make sense, but unfortunately, it's not the way it works. Instead, when someone makes even $1 over some arbitrary program limit, their food assistance completely vanishes. In some cases, it actually costs people more to have a full-time work because their income causes them to lose all of the benefits they rely on to put food on the table. That's frustrating to lawmakers like me because I want these programs to work well, and they don't work well like this. I know there's been some efforts to try to address some of these issues around the edges, but we need to, I think, figure out a better way. It's also frustrating to those who administer these programs. And most important, that's frustrating to the very people these programs are trying to help. Today, we're going to hear about these challenges, and by shining a light on this issue, I hope it becomes a major part of an eventual White House conference on hunger. The system today isn't working the way we all want it to work. We need some reforms that smooth out these cliffs so that as people make more money, they simply get less assistance until none is needed. Because we cannot pull the rug out from people working hard to get back on their feet. Life is complicated, and I think we all know that. But I am grateful to all of you being here. Let me get my introduce our witnesses here. Ms. Georgia Allen is the co-founder of Soaring Independent Cooperative, a worker-owned home care agency and a startup for the Family Child Care Cooperative Incubator in Madison, Wisconsin. Director Pedro J. Perez is the executive director of the Charlotte Family Housing Shelter. He has dedicated his life to helping families living in poverty gain access to safe housing, educational opportunities, and economic success, focusing on people of color. Dr. Stephanie Hoops is the national director of the United for Alice, a driver of research and innovation around asset limited, income constrained, employed households. She works with United Way's corporations, foundations, and nonprofits across the country to inform policy and promote positive change. Dr. Brittany Burkin serves as a principal advisor on the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta's Community and Economic Development Team. She specializes in the identification of structural barriers and solutions to career advancement for low-income working families. Ms. Karen Shulkoff is the founder, CEO of Leap Fund, and a product strategist. She is a fellow and member of the Good Work Guild, which focuses on economic security and labor market transforming technologies. I am grateful to all of you for being here. Again, I know some of you were on call, I think, last week, and the schedule is all messed up, and so we almost got screwed up again this week, but in any event, we're done with votes right this second, and so I'm now happy to yield to Ms. Allen and to listen to you, for you to provide your testimony. So you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on this at this roundtable. As we all know, even before the pandemic, the number of individuals and families living in poverty or working poor are great and even greater now. Getting to the middle class for many means navigating the complicated world of how changes to wages, employer benefits, ultimately impact public benefit and their net income eligibility. Today, I'm going to share some of my personal experience and professional knowledge in navigating public benefits or benefits as a poverty working poor class in the U.S. Mr. Chairman, you have so graciously shared the contributors to food insecurity. And from my experience, I understand that it is interdependent on an individual or a family's economic stability to obtain and maintain housing, childcare, quality education, and healthcare. I've learned a lot on my journey about what has and hasn't worked when needing to utilize public benefits as you aspire to no longer need them or depend on them. And pursue a path to the middle class. In my case, ending generational poverty cycle and disrupting the rules that promote benefit cliffs and decrease our intention of public benefits helping families achieve economic stability is my passion. My personal experience, I grew up with a mom that worked multiple jobs to support my 4 siblings and I, but really couldn't risk losing food share, healthcare subsidy, and other critical benefits that our wages alone couldn't cover. At 16, being a part of her household, I thought I could help by securing my first job at Subway. It wasn't much money, but it put our combined family income over the eligibility limit for food share, Medicaid, and assistance. Causing us to experience the benefit cliff. My job couldn't make up for those losses, so as a young teenager, I had to quit and really couldn't understand it. As an adult, I have a family of my own, and I was starting to experience the same challenges and having to navigate depending on public benefits, and always had this, curiosity of why. I was better able to navigate my career path because I've learned how to navigate resources, understanding like what benefits were actually helpful and those that were contributing to the cycle of poverty. The trauma experienced making daily decisions about meeting basic needs, the day-to-day needs, juggling multiple jobs, and navigating the benefit cliff promote health and behavioral and health issues for not only the parent, but the children who are experiencing poverty and don't leave room to pursue a life outside of that. We all know that this provokes short-term and long-term physical and mental exhaustion. I know that so well as those I support. And, those navigating the benefit cliff repeatedly without the right resources to fill the gap at the cliff ultimately give up or feel trapped. And I know this again from watching my own family and others fall into this vicious trap of the cycle of generational poverty. So my contribution, just to share a little about disrupting the generational poverty cycle and helping communities of low wealth collectively build wealth to invest resources. We really need to fill the gaps between the benefit cliff and to economic stability. I do work audaciously to promote awareness to both, state entities, nonprofit organizations, for-profit companies to help collectively enhance resources through efficiencies of public benefits, community resources to promote a strong economy and workforce. Some of my social impact ventures, of course, very passionate about industries that are led by women, which would include direct care and childcare. So I provide a platform for home care workers to increase their wages, increase their training, provide supports that they would need and resources like childcare and training to ensure that this industry can provide the quality care and not lose more of the workforce. The Village Star Network, Care Network, the Family Child Care Incubator, we provide supports both to formal childcare providers and those informal childcare providers with startup maintenance of to increase the family care sites to ensure that there's no childcare labor gaps. And these providers that we typically target are those that serve a low wealth or public assisted dependent families. So again, working to bridge the gap, and it would be extremely beneficial to not only low wage workers, but our economy as a whole, if we were able to bring efficiencies to the programs that we provide and be more intentional about those gaps between a benefit cliff and economic stability. So I will end there.
Thank you very much. Director Perez, I will recognize you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern, Ranking Member Cole, members of the committee, and fellow panelists. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak with you on the ongoing crisis of food insecurity, homelessness, and the benefits cliff. I bring my lived experience of poverty and hunger to this conversation. My mom raised me by herself because she had to divorce my father when I was very little. He was violent and self-medicating because of the racism and the trauma he experienced as an Afro-Caribbean Taino Indian. Years later, he sobered up and became a loving grandfather to my children. I know that my mother went hungry so that my brother and I could eat. I remember only having white rice and ketchup at the end of each month during my formative years. My mother did not speak English, but quickly stepped up to learn the language and obtained her GED. Then she pursued and received her LPN associate's degree, then a bachelor's degree to become a registered nurse, and finally earning a master's degree to become a nursing administrator in a local New York City hospital. Our journey was long and arduous. Sadly, my mother died from COVID this past November in a New York City nursing home. Here, although not fully part of this discussion, is another example of how the system pushes people into poverty. We could not afford the cost of the nursing home to get her elder care, so I had to reverse her journey out of poverty by selling off any assets she had, her home, her car, and we used savings to pay for the care before Medicaid would step in and help. I know, again, that this is not part of the discussion, but it always pains me whenever I talk about my hero. I followed my mother's example of a hard work ethic and accomplishments. I earned an associate's and a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in public administration from Marist College. I rose to the rank of Brigadier General in the New York State Police, becoming the first Afro-Caribbean Taino Indian to hold this rank in the history of the New York State Police. I served as the interim superintendent during Governor Spitzer's and Patterson's administration. During my tenure as a New York State Trooper, I volunteered for nonprofits whose missions and focus were helping the poor and marginalized families and communities lift themselves out of poverty. When I retired in 2010, I continued serving nonprofits, working as the director of the Capital District YMCA, the City of Albany's Brothers and Sisters Keeper Initiative, the City of Albany's Poverty Reduction Initiative, and now work for Charlotte Family Housing in Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte Family Housing is a shelter to housing program for working families experiencing homelessness. Our mission is to empower working families experiencing homelessness to achieve lifelong self-sufficiency through shelter, housing, supportive services, and advocacy. In each of these organizations, I saw firsthand the impact of poverty, homelessness, hunger, and the effects of the benefits cliff on the families we served. I watched working moms and dads making heartbreaking decisions like my mother had to make as they try to stretch their income to keep themselves stably housed and feed their families. Mothers and fathers needing the support of SNAP and TANF refuse sometimes to accept raises or promotions, not because they're not interested in advancing their earning capacity or their careers, but because if they accept a raise or a promotion, these promotions and these raises may not make up for the loss of benefits as a direct result of the benefits cliff. I know that hunger and insecurity in the United States is still tragically high. There are an estimated 17 million hungry children in America now, 6 million more than before the pandemic. And hunger in households with children is also up, and 2/3 of those children in these households are children of color, and they're twice as likely as white children to face hunger. My home state of North Carolina is tied with Texas as the ninth hungriest state in the union. When President Lyndon Johnson launched his War on Poverty and Great Society with a set of domestic programs to end poverty and racial injustice, as a nation, we have tried very hard to eliminate and reduce it, poverty, homelessness, and disenfranchisement. All these laudatory efforts were and are essential to our democracy and overall prosperity as a nation. However, hidden within these programs are regulations creating consequences and barriers that prevent many people from finding a bridge out of poverty. Among these is the benefits cliff. And I know I am preaching to the choir about the benefits cliff effect. The abrupt reduction or loss of benefits can be very disruptive to families because even though the household earnings have increased, they usually have not grown enough for self-sufficiency. The benefits cliff effect happens to workers near poverty line who are eligible for a variety of different programs, as mentioned, food stamps, Medicaid, earned income tax credits, temporary assistance to needy families, and subsidized public housing. The working poor reach a point where a dollar increase in their hourly wage can significantly reduce, in fact, may cause them to lose benefits altogether. Some families we serve at Charlotte Family Housing have reported that they are scared to accept a raise or accept a promotion, or even reporting if they do accept those for fear that they'll lose their benefits because the increases that they may get will not cover what they have lost. What I believe we ought to consider is a gradual exit ramp for these reductions, letting families slowly adjust to the benefit reductions as their income and expenses change. I'm going to stop here and once again, thank you. I have submitted a statement with other proposals and other suggestions within that I believe might be helpful. And I will certainly participate in the question and answer portion of discussion. Once again, thank you, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Well, Director Perez, thank you very much for your testimony, and I speak for everybody on this committee when I say how sorry we are to hear about the loss of your mother. But you know, given your resume and your eloquence, I'm sure she was very, very proud of you. So any event, but please note that you will remain in our prayers. I'm now happy to turn to Dr. Hoops. You're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Hoops, National Director of United for Alice, a driver of research and innovation around financial hardship. Thank you for inviting me today. And I'd like to introduce you to someone very important to this conversation, someone you all know, but perhaps not by name, Alice. Asset limited, income constrained, employed. Alice households have little or no savings, struggle paycheck to paycheck, and at this time of year are worried about whether they can afford a Thanksgiving dinner. Alice households earn above the federal poverty level, but below a bare minimum household budget that consists of housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, a smartphone plan, plus taxes. And the crux of the problem is the mismatch between wages and the basic cost of living. So who is Alice? Well, we all know Alice. In fact, you've probably already interacted with several Alice workers today. The server at your coffee shop, your child's childcare worker, or perhaps the security guard at the parking lot. And during the pandemic, Alice helped many of us work from home. So how many households are struggling in the US? Well, according to the federal poverty level in 2018, 16 million households in the US earn below the federal poverty level. But we found another 35 million were Alice. So combined, 51 million households, 42% of US households, earn below the Alice threshold leading into the pandemic. Food is the canary in the coal mine for Alice. When Alice doesn't earn enough, food is often the first budget item to be impacted, warning of bigger problems such as job loss, housing instability, and social isolation. There's two things I'd like to share to emphasize this with the committee today. The first is on public food assistance and the benefits cliff, and the second is the impact of the pandemic on Alice. So as you all know, the largest food program in the US is SNAP, and eligibility for SNAP is 130% of the federal poverty level, which was around $33,000, $34,000 for a family of four in 2019. Yet the cost of basics was more than double that in most places. So for example, for a family of four, it costs $70,000 in Philadelphia, Oklahoma City, Phoenix, Charleston, West Virginia, and Fort Worth, Texas. So what that means is for all the families earning above $33,000, but below $70,000, they were struggling and yet not eligible for basic food assistance. So in terms of the benefit cliff, it's a really important issue for the group of people who earn in that small income band right near the federal poverty level. And for those households, it makes a huge difference, the coordination between benefits and the phasing out of benefits as they earn more. But since most ALICE families are not eligible for public assistance, they don't face a benefits cliff. They do face a huge uphill battle to afford the basics for their family. So what the ALICE metrics highlight is how far short public assistance is from financial stability. So some key questions for this committee on the purpose of public policy, and especially food policy. Is it to reduce hunger? Is it to move families from poverty to ALICE? Or is it to help families become financially stable? Next, I'd like to turn to the impact of the pandemic on ALICE. We have a new report actually released just today called The Pandemic Divide. And it shows that ALICE had a much tougher time during the pandemic than other households. So households below the ALICE threshold were much more likely to experience job disruption and food insecurity, while households with higher incomes were more likely to report living comfortably. So I'd like to share three key findings, and I hope you'll read the rest of the report when you have a chance. But first, families with children especially struggled with access to food. 4 in 10 households below the ALICE threshold reported that their children were not eating enough because they could not afford enough food. And more than half reported that they were concerned about having enough food. Second finding is that those who struggled the most during the pandemic did receive public assistance, including SNAP and school meals. But the survey results also showed that despite receiving that public assistance, they continued to struggle. And lastly, the report provides some insights into what helps and what doesn't help move families from poverty to financial stability. And while most ALICE households reported doing worse during the pandemic, a small group reported doing better. So understanding the characteristics of that group is instructive. So respondents below the ALICE threshold who reported being better off were more likely to have worked full-time, received a raise, had insurance through an employer, maintained a savings account and rainy day funds, and had a retirement plan on track. So in conclusion, we urge you to take heed of the canary in the coal mine and persevere in your work to end food insecurity and to address the underlying causes. If there's something that we've learned from the pandemic, it's that we all need ALICE. We all do better when ALICE does better. In fact, the more ALICE participates in the US economy, the more it will grow. Thank you for inviting me to provide this testimony today.
Thank you very much. Dr. Burkin, you are recognized for your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Brittany Burkin, and I'm a principal advisor with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta and a member of the Advancing Careers Initiative that works to improve economic mobility and resilience by identifying how benefits cliffs can create financial disincentives to career advancement. We provide analytical tools and research that support solutions to benefits cliffs and other structural financial barriers. We are currently engaged in benefits cliffs related projects with communities and states across the country, including the states of Massachusetts, Oklahoma, and Texas, as well as other partnerships that may be of interest to members. While sharing my expertise on benefits cliffs today, I'm speaking on my own behalf, and my views do not necessarily represent those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta or the Federal Reserve System. I'd like to begin by explaining why the Atlanta Fed is studying the impact of benefits cliffs on workers in the economy. Improving economic mobility and resilience is a key aspect of our community development responsibilities and is complementary to our monetary policy mandate to promote maximum employment. Economic mobility and resilience focuses on an individual's ability to raise their standard of living and ultimately maintain financial stability and well-being, even through unexpected challenges in daily living. A core aspect of our work is identifying and understanding the barriers that challenge economic mobility, such as benefits cliffs, as they may hamper the ability of workers to increase their income, accumulate assets, and improve their standard of living. Consider this true life example. A single parent has 2 children younger than 5. She works full-time and her employer offers her a 10-cent an hour raise. That nominal wage increase put her over the threshold of eligibility for childcare subsidy. Based on the subsidy values in her state, the approximate $200 in annual increased wages she would have resulted in the loss of about $9,000 in childcare subsidy. She faced the dilemma of choosing between career advancement and the childcare subsidy which she needed to afford childcare for her children and keep her job. A benefits cliff like the one I described can be especially challenging if families lose eligibility to the public benefit program before they can afford the cost of goods and services without sacrificing other household budget items. I recently conducted research with colleagues on childcare benefits cliffs that underscores this challenge. Using Florida as a case study, it was determined that for a family of 2 adults and 2 young children, the size of the cliff can be as high as $16,000 with an average financial gap of nearly $11,000. While the example I shared is reflective of one program, it's important to consider the potential interaction of all core public benefit programs. Low-income families may access multiple public benefits depending on eligibility requirements, income, need, and availability. As workers advance in careers and earnings increase, the values of subsidies may be reduced, and in combination, this can also cause a reduction in net financial resources. Depending on a family composition and the public benefits programs accessed, it is possible that a family may be no better off with an income of $51,000 than $7,000. Advancing Careers also focuses on how benefits cliffs interact with local workforce and economic development strategies. Workforce development is an important component of broader strategies to promote economic mobility and supply businesses with skilled talent. Many individuals in workforce development programs receive some form of public assistance. Benefits cliffs may affect decisions related to career advancement in ways that ultimately have consequences for economic self-sufficiency. Workers may turn down opportunities to advance in their careers. Additionally, families may struggle to accurately forecast when and how much public assistance they will lose as wages increase. Unanticipated losses in public assistance may create financial instability for a family just at the time they're beginning a new career, jeopardizing their stable employment. And again, individuals may advance in their careers, but losses in public assistance reduce or eliminate potential gains in the family's total financial resources. This last consequence has implications for how policymakers evaluate the effectiveness of their workforce programs. If evaluation focuses on measuring gains in wages alone, the analysis may find improvements in earnings, but will not reflect that the programs may not have improved the standard of living for families. The Advancing Careers research also focuses on benefits cliffs from the perspective of government finances. As individuals earn more, they contribute more to employment taxes and pay more in consumer taxes as they spend more. At the same time, governments spend less on public assistance programs. Atlanta Fed research has estimated large potential returns to taxpayers when workers on public assistance advance to higher earnings through career pathways. Carefully designed policies and programs that address benefits cliffs may increase financial stability for families as they advance in careers and transition off of public assistance. It can reduce the uncertainty workers face when trying to forecast how increased earnings will affect their overall financial resources and result in large potential returns to taxpayers. To accomplish these goals, policies and programs would need to improve the short and medium-term financial incentives of individuals to advance in their career pathways. If of interest, I can be available to members and staff to provide a demo of our tools and analytical capabilities on the interaction of public benefit programs and policies along various career pathways. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share testimony today.
Thank you very much. Now we'll turn to Ms. Shulkoff. You are recognized for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Shulkoff, and I'm the founder and CEO of Leap Fund. So I started working on the benefits cliff issue in 2018, and we started by investigating the issue with human-centered, user-centered approach. So in plain language, this means we went directly to folks receiving public benefits and to the community-based organizations that are delivering services to them, and we asked them, is this something you've ever heard of or experienced? And the answer was a resounding yes. So one of the biggest things I wanted to highlight, particularly in Brittany Burkin's testimony, is that no one knows if they'll hit a benefits cliff until after it's already happened to them. we learned that there's two sets of folks affected by benefits cliffs: those that stand to hit a substantial cliff and face a financial catastrophe, but there's this much wider group of folks that are making financially conservative decisions out of fear of hitting this benefits cliff. And what this means is people are turning down raises and promotions, cutting hours, leaving jobs out of this fear. So it has a term in academia, I think, and it's called parking at the cliff. And this means people get stuck not just in utilizing benefits, but trapped in poverty altogether, unable to move ahead in their careers, in their education, in their ambitions, because the math just doesn't make sense. So at Leap Fund, we're tackling this issue in 3 ways. Our goal is to find, bridge, and eliminate benefits cliffs altogether. So to find the cliff, we took on the issue of transparency. We built a calculator that predicts benefits cliffs, informed with feedback from benefits recipients and coaches, because not knowing if you'll hit a benefits cliff is essentially a black box algorithm that runs against folks. We're running a benefits cliff coaching program right now with partners across the country that trains coaches to talk to clients about benefits cliffs and their potential effects. The overall goal here is to bring more information to the client so that they can make the most important decisions in their lives, like a client who is able to better negotiate their salary by understanding their particular benefits cliff. But we know transparency is actually not enough. That's why we're also focused on bridging the cliff, because if someone finds out that they'll hit a substantial benefits cliff, it can be really strategic for them to turn down a raise, a promotion, more hours, to avoid sending their family into a financial catastrophe. We've designed an employer-based financial solution pilot that will help folks bridge the cliff. I know that this is a newer issue to tackle from a federal government perspective, but it's also novel for employers. So when we started talking with employers in 2019, many had never even heard of the problem, let alone considered the impact that it might be having on their workforce. But now, in the past year, through the pandemic, employers have been quickly upskilled in the mechanics of how all this works with unemployment benefits through negotiating with their workers on the decisions that they're weighing. To eliminate the cliff, we're focused on data and storytelling, which is one of the reasons we're so excited to be here today. When we started in 2018, we also reached out to folks shaping and enforcing policies so that we could better understand the issues. We talked with benefits agencies, legislators, folks at think tanks, and we asked them all as well, have you heard of benefits cliffs? The answers we got back were starkly different from the benefits recipients. Some had never heard of the issue, some had heard of it, but then asked me, haven't we solved this already? And then others agreed, yeah, this is an important issue, but it's a lower priority amongst many other needs. This kind of illustrates that gap in understanding and urgency between those creating and enforcing the policies and the public benefits recipients themselves. So no one knows how many people actually hit benefits cliffs. And this is for a variety of reasons, including government agencies and information being siloed, data not being shared between the agencies, let alone with the benefits recipients. And more often than not, the necessary data to truly understand the scope of the problem isn't even tracked or collected at scale in the first place. This means benefits cliff data can be hard to come by, distinctly local, and based on who's independently run a study. As an example of the gaps in our understanding, some of the employers we talked to said they had workers that had in fact turned down a raise or a promotion. So I would say to them, oh, that's interesting. Did you ask them why? And they would sort of look at me and furrow the brow and say, no, I didn't. There's an opportunity here to better understand nationally how many people are turning down jobs and promotions and why. So at the end of the day, our solutions are a Band-Aid for what's ultimately a policy failure. I'm grateful for this opportunity to start talking through these questions that lead to solutions, knowing, of course, you can't change what you don't measure. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to yield to my colleagues for questions first. Ms. Scanlon, questions or comments, Ms. Scanlon, Ms. Ross, and Mr. DeSaulnier. But let me just say, by way of kind of putting all this into context, the reason why the Rules Committee is doing these hearings on hunger and food insecurity and benefits cliffs and 1,000 other things related to this central topic is because the jurisdiction in terms of committee jurisdiction to deal with these issues falls under multiple committees. And so we tend to talk about these issues in bits and pieces and not holistically. And so the Rules Committee is, we can do whatever the hell we want to do here, right? So we have no like jurisdictional constraints. And so we're kind of operating like the old Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs used to operate. We're looking at kind of the big picture and how all the pieces fit together. The goal is to get the White House to do a White House Conference of Food, Nutrition, Health, and Hunger, to tie everything together and to actually come up with a plan with benchmarks and to assign responsibility to what the federal government needs to do, what businesses need to do, what we need to do better in the nonprofit world, how we can share good ideas at the state and local level. Again, to look at all this more holistically, because if you're going to solve this, it's not just about increasing SNAP benefits, right? It's about a whole bunch of other stuff. And we talk about benefit cliffs. It is, it's not only SNAP benefits, it's childcare benefits, it's housing benefits, it's a whole bunch of stuff. So, so that's kind of the context of this. And so your testimony is going to go into our volume that we are providing the White House. For the basis of this conference, we want the White House then to reach back out to you and to begin to figure out how we flush this topic out more and what are the solutions and how we can implement them. So that's just the context. But anyway, I'll save my questions to the end. People are in and out of committees. And this is, Washington is a crazy place right now. But in any event, I'm going to yield first to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for any comments or questions she may have.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman, for convening this. Ms. Shulkoff, since you were up last, and I had a couple of questions based on your testimony, I was really interested in what you had to say about data. We just don't have the data to address the cliffs and where they're occurring, et cetera. Can you give us some examples? I think you had some examples of states that are successfully working to address benefit cliffs, and then tie that to where we need to get data. What kind of data should the federal government be collecting in order to, start to address this problem a little more holistically?
Thank you for the question. Let me answer your question by going a little to the left of it. We actually created a resource called benefitscliff.com, which is an educational site solely focused on benefits cliffs. We're obsessed with benefits cliffs. Because when we started, there was no way to truly understand who was working in the space and what they were finding, or a centralized understanding of who's thinking about policy change and in what ways. Several of the folks on this call are highly sourced in that site, including Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta and Alice. So there's this concept in tech called open source. And one of its tenets is basically, let me share this one little thing I figured out so that nobody else ever has to waste time in figuring it out. And then we can all build quicker and smarter in the building blocks here. So this is what we attempted to do in that site, to build on what's already been done. But this is essentially like a digital community bulletin board. And there's a real opportunity for government to step into ownership of this issue, as the chairman mentioned, in a more holistic and rules-based way, not just in understanding the studies and changing the policies, but for example, in making benefits cliff calculators the norm in every state across the country. The gaps in data can be anywhere from the fact that we do track how many people get promotions and new jobs, but we're not tracking how many people turn them down. That simple area could be a really interesting place to begin.
Chairman, if this is Pedro Perez, if I can chime in and just piggyback on what Ms. Shulkoff said. She had mentioned employers needing to be educating themselves in understanding both the benefits cliff and the barriers that they may present. For instance, when families are trying to access benefits, they have to go to meetings with their caseworker. Sometimes the employer does not give them the time. And so one of the things that employers can do is to accommodate some time off or adjust schedules so that families can go to hearings and about their benefits. the employers can network together to provide access to childcare during these meetings with that they have to attend, and they can also bring in success coaches that will help these families, as Ms. Shulkoff has indicated and others have indicated, to learn about how to navigate the benefits before they run into it. And so there are a number of things that employers can do, and that both faith-based and community-based organizations, governments can do, and there are some states that are trying to make some changes.
And if I can
Mr.
just
Chairman.
I was just going to add, there's one more tool that might be useful for you, and I don't want to steal Brittany's thunder. There's a CLIF tool that the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta developed using the ALICE data as well to show, to help coaches, help people seeking jobs, which jobs made the most sense. And it shows not only the job at time zero, but as you progressed in that career of that position. And they have zillions of jobs listed, so you can drill down in whatever your particular area is, but it shows, at the beginning when you need training and what benefits you might be eligible for. And then over time, how you are less eligible for those benefits, but your salary may or may not be increasing, so that it may help people make smart choices. It's certainly early on in their careers.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may add in, and thank you, Stephanie. Yes, so we have created a suite of tools at this point, and part of that suite of tools in the engine is a policy rules database that has, for all core public benefit programs, the rules for every state in the nation, so that we're able to understand some of the differences, which is part of the point that I wanted to pick up in the original question. There are different eligibility rules, there are different requirements for applications. So the need to understand all of those, while our policy rules database and our suite of tools can help document what those policy rules are and how for different states they interact. And in my opening remarks, I mentioned that, right? So that's a really important component, is actually the interaction of different public benefits programs. The other piece of data that I think is incredibly important to think about is, what is the combination of public benefits families are most accessing? And understanding then, as their wages are advancing and as they're advancing in careers, what are the potential benefits cliffs that they're going to hit? How can those be mitigated? And so part of our goal with this suite of tools is really to support communities and states in understanding and having a better line of sight, and doing so against career pathways, so that you have that eye on economic mobility and career advancement over time. But just wanted to weigh in both on the suite of resources, but also the consideration of looking at administrative data to understand who is really accessing public benefit programs for how long, and which combination ultimately is supporting economic mobility, and where may there be additional barriers.
You have to unmute.
Sorry, didn't want background noise in there. I have to say that listening to this really supports the idea that we need to take a holistic look at the federal level, because by definition, we're talking about people who are struggling economically. And we know that when you're in that position, the ability to go out and do a lot of research when you're trying to figure out how to get food on the table and how to pay the rent and how to pay for the medical bills, it doesn't leave you a lot of time for that kind of research. So I think part of our focus obviously has to be on, how can we streamline this? How can we drive things more towards one-stop shopping and take some of the burden off the folks who are already struggling to make ends meet to begin with? So thank you, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. And I also think, one of the problems here in Congress is that, many of us don't have lived experiences of being in poverty, of struggling on SNAP, or, and as well-intentioned as we all like to be, sometimes what's missing, are the fine details. That one glove doesn't fit all. And things aren't always black and white. There's a gray area here, and we need to understand how these programs work in real life, with real people, with real families. who are struggling to make ends meet. Let me yield now to Ms. Ross.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses, particularly my colleague from North Carolina. I'm from the Raleigh area, so great to have you with us. And I too am sad about your mom, and thank you so much for sharing with us. One thing that the chairman didn't tell you about the Rules Committee, and I'm new to the Rules Committee, is that it is a family. And so we get to know each other and we care quite a lot about each other. I also wanted to point out that North Carolina has so many people who have this benefits cliff that affects them. We rank among the top 10 states for the highest number of SNAP recipients. And we have hunger issues, not just in the big cities, but also throughout the rural areas of North Carolina. And frequently we don't focus on that. And my question for all of you actually goes to one of the most important assistance programs to people who are living below the poverty level throughout the country, but which is received inconsistently based on state policy, and that is Medicaid. North Carolina is one of only 12 states in the country that has not opted in to Medicaid expansion. And I'd like all of you to describe the impact of Medicaid expansion for individuals earning near the federal benefits cliff in expansion states compared with counterparts in non-expansion states where their health care is just simply not covered. And address whether you think universal Medicaid expansion would be a real game changer and the significance of that in the non-expansion states. Maybe Mr. Perez, you could start. I don't know if you thought about this, given that you're from North Carolina, and then we can hear from the other folks.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Ross. In fact, one of the struggles that we have with the families that we serve that are experiencing homelessness while working every single day is that their children might get Medicaid, but the parents do not. And so the parents have to figure out ways of maintaining their health. And obviously during this pandemic, that has been the most devastating issue to many of these parents. The pandemic has hit Black and brown women and families in a much more severe way than other communities. And if they had had the opportunity to have Medicaid for all, they could have been treated and dealt with the issues that they face in terms of their health. So obviously, during this pandemic, many families have put off going to the hospital because the hospitals could not accept them based on the fact that they were overwhelmed with pandemic cases. And so they put off medical care, they put off surgeries, they put off treatment. And so many of our families were suffering from health issues and even just as importantly, mental health issues. And so we have seen that impact on the families we've been serving and on many families here, particularly in Charlotte, because that's where I'm based. But I know that it's impacted many families across North Carolina, and in many ways, sometimes even more impactful in the rural parts of this state and many other states, because access to healthcare is even more difficult when you're not in metro areas. So it is a significant issue that I think we need to address.
Does anybody else want to pipe in, or I'll ask another question?
I will respond briefly to, oh, Stephanie, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I went first last time.
Fair enough. I was just going to add that while I've not looked at the specifics of your question, part of the analytical capabilities in our suite of tools that I mentioned is to be able to look across different state policies and understand options, whether that's Medicaid for adults, Medicaid for children, the health insurance subsidized values of the marketplace. So if that is a question that is, an analytical capability that we have and could work with you to look at how that would play out across different states with different policies.
And I was just going to add that the eligibility for Medicaid is 138% of the federal poverty level. So it's just so woefully low that it's not nearly reaching the number of people who are struggling. And I think Pedro referred to this, with folks that he works with, even you can be homeless, working, and you still don't qualify. So there's a very small issue about Medicaid expansion and the benefits cliff, but there's a much bigger issue of who needs support.
And I'll just add that, you know, Medicaid, like as a working poor or individual or family, medical is like the last thing, like the first thing that you don't worry about. It's like food because you're used to not having it. So I know that, you know, navigating the complexity of the systems of making enough to meet like your housing needs and things like that, and qualifying as an individual or family for the adults, it is looking at everything else you can lose. Medical is the first thing, but it's very important and needed, right? Like you lose that first. So expanding Medicaid is very important to have.
Well, thank you. Hopefully we can do that in Build Back Better. My second question is about housing and the benefits cliffs in housing. And what I've learned, I was a state legislator and have a county that's put together an affordable housing plan, is that affordable housing means different things to different people. You know, there are people who are just functionally homeless. There are people who get housing vouchers and maybe on housing assistance. There are people who have disabilities and need supportive housing. And then we just have people who are working as hard as they can, but living in areas like the area that I represent, which is gentrifying, and they get priced out of their housing. And so I know that we have several different programs to address these kinds of things, and hopefully we'll see expansions in the Build Back Better. But are there any suggestions that you have for us about how to address the benefits cliff when it comes to affordable housing? Or is it simply that we don't have enough support for affordable housing to begin with?
Representative Ross, if I can chime in on that, because here in Charlotte, I'm part of a consortium of nonprofits that have been working on the source of income discrimination issue. And here in Charlotte, we're trying to resolve that locally. But as you know, because this is not a home rule state, it is the legislature in Raleigh that can make the impact of changing that so that property owners will not discriminate regardless of the source of income. And we have seen significant amount of landlords not wanting to accept vouchers, HUD vouchers, and other kinds of vouchers, including vouchers for veterans who have served our country to protect us, and that is outrageous. And so, you know, the one other comment that I wish to make on this is that the eviction moratorium was crucial during this pandemic, but the unintended consequence of that has been that those apartment complexes and those of individual property owners, where they could raise rents because they could not evict, they did in fact raise rents. And that has made access to affordable housing, which was already a crisis, even more difficult today. And so with forced displacement here in Charlotte particularly, and in all likelihood in Raleigh as well, you have families who still have to work in the metro area, but can't afford to live in the metro area. So what do? They move to an adjoining county where rents may be lower, but that of course doesn't solve their problem, because now their childcare costs are going to increase, their transportation costs are going to increase, and their salaries haven't gone up at all. So housing still remains a critical problem. Affordable housing still remains a critical problem. And these issues are interconnected. They're intersectional. We can't simply look at one and think that we're going to solve it by simply looking at one. We have to look at this holistically in terms of how we're going to resolve this entire issue.
Just open it up to anybody else, and then I'll let Mr. DeSagne have the floor. I know I've taken quite a bit of time.
In regards to, if I can weigh in on this, in regards to the housing instability or homelessness, you know, there is a need for helping those that have the potential, like that are experiencing these benefit cliffs, reach economic stability, so that the, you know, like low-income housing, that's 30% of your income, so that others who can't reach that for maybe mental health, health issues can utilize that. But I think having, I know having more resources to help people bridge the gap between a benefit cliff so that they can afford marketplace rent. We have people here who are getting, apartments are being bought as sold as homes. I mean, for housing, as houses or condos, which is basically making it harder for people to access those units. We really need to strengthen our communities' economic stability so that they can afford home ownership and not get priced out. We need to, if market rent is going to be market rent, they need to, because even 30% of your income, for example, for low income housing, it does not allow that person to, afford food, afford childcare, afford all these other other needs that they have to take care of. So again, thinking about the trajectory of what resources how we bridge the benefit cliff for those that do have the potential to afford market rent.
And if I could add in, I totally agree with what Pedro and Georgia said. I think they articulated it very well. And I just wanted to alert the committee to another phenomenon that's happening in the wake of COVID is with remote work increasing, people are searching out the areas of the country where the cost of housing is lower. And yet, if your job is tied to that area, inflation is coming to you, even though your job is staying the same and your wage is staying the same. And so that pressure on low cost units is really increasing over the last year. And so in a way, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's on the ground, it's a real problem for Alice families.
Yeah, well, that's going on in North Carolina for sure, particularly in my area. Thank you all very, very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. DeSagne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to Ms. Frost's comment about family, I appreciate that. That would make the chairman the dad. He just left. I want the keys to the car, Dad. I just want to, seriously, he's back. He missed it.
I heard it. I heard it. Yeah.
Okay.
I
I want
heard
the
it.
keys to the good car this
We
time.
are a family. We're like the Addams family, but that's
I guess that would make me lurch. Anyways, I digress. I want to thank you, Jim, again, and my colleagues. This has really been terrific. I wanted the opportunity, the old Rahm Emanuel quote about every challenge has a crisis, has an opportunity. And to the chairman's comments about our dysfunctional family jurisdictionally in the Congress, and you as providers of information, but also more retail, dealing with actual clients. I have a subcommittee in the Education Labor Committee that includes health, health, employment, labor. And our discussions with employers now, particularly large employers, coming out of COVID is really a wonderful opportunity, I think, because their business model is changing. And I think it's a chance for us to change culturally from we're still in our old social model of one career in one household from a governance standpoint, as opposed to what the reality is, which is single parent homes, 2-income homes. My district is home to 4 of the 10 largest mega commutes in the East Bay of the Bay Area. So all of these things I hear about every day in my 30 years in local, state, and federal office. So Karen, my question is, how can we sort of work, and maybe to the chairman as we go through this, with the jurisdictional issues within the Congress, and rules I think is appropriately set to be the sort of convener of this. And for me, it would be the employer-employee relationship, which I get a sense is about to change, or could change significantly, at least significantly around the edges, because the world has changed. Employers here and in other areas like the Bay Area, urban areas, they're now looking at their business model because they don't want everybody driving in the Silicon Valley or the financial district in San Francisco now. They see the benefit of that. Benefits our infrastructure costs. That's why we need childcare. So this opportunity of working with you sort of evidence-based. And by the way, since I've been here, I bookmarked as a favorite the benefit cliff that you referred to. So where are there opportunities, Karen, as we, or any of you, as we come out of this with this initiative that the chairman has been so thoughtful about, to sort of convene these things with this coming out of COVID? Because on the employer-employee relationship, and the social safety net is another issue, and the difficulties we're currently having during our discussions on reconciliation, not to give up on that, but there's an opportunity to change both, and at least in where I sit in my jurisdictional opportunities, it's this employer-employee relationship, wages, benefits, and the cost of living, cost of housing, cost of transportation, cost of education, and cost of taxes. So those fixed costs. Maybe you can help us in this initiative, at least in this instance, of where you see opportunities as the employer-employee relationship seems to be shifting dramatically right now as we speak, and I'm not sure everybody's conscious of it, and maybe I'm more hopeful than I should be. But to any of you, where is the opportunity in this crisis, and specifically more around the benefit cliff and the employer-employee traditional relationship?
Well, I can jump in really quickly, because you're right. This isn't just a public benefits issue. This is truly a workforce problem. And particularly for employers paying at or around minimum wage in their state, it can be confusing, because holistically, no one knows how many workers are susceptible to these benefits cliffs, and it can vary industry by industry. We know it's likely 1 in 5 employers have workers facing benefits cliffs from a study done by the Ohio Chamber of Commerce Research Foundation in 2019. But this is that financially conservative decision making that gets made that I was talking about earlier, and it can really impact an employer's ability to attract and retain talent, to maintain predictable scheduling, and can contribute to this churn. So the industries that can be affected include, as you said, healthcare, also restaurants and hospitality, retail, and more. Because you've probably already know this, it's been in the news a lot. But something that we noticed even in 2019 is there's this real gap of understanding between what workers are experiencing on the ground and the cost of living, as you said, versus the employer's impression about what their workers need and want. So frequently workers don't share about public benefits with their boss or manager because they don't want the stigma that can be attached to it surrounding them, and they view it as their own personal situation. And on the employer side, employers can be hesitant because, as some of them have put it to us, they don't want to be, quote, involved in their employees' personal lives. So there's this, what I call an unlit hallway between bosses and workers, which is dark mostly out of fear, misunderstanding, and stigma. So what's interesting is that employers really can be a real partner here in this work, and they're interested to do so. But the learning curve has been steep, and there's more work to do. So the areas that this can impact are particularly right now in this time where people have walked away from jobs. Certain industries are having a hard time attracting and retaining talent. Finding ways to meet the needs of this particular population will be very important in attracting and retaining talent.
Yeah, this
If I may
is a
chime in.
wonderful. Go ahead, Pedro. Sorry.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, go ahead.
Here in Charlotte, we have seen a number of major employers. Charlotte is grew to be a banking hub, and now it's turning into a health and digital hub. But many employers have not waited for a federal decision on raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. In fact, what many employers here have done is recognized, because Charlotte, after the Getty report, was listed as 50th last in the opportunity for children to lift themselves out of poverty. So a lot of education has gone on in this community. And so employers, what they have done, for instance, they have raised their basic entry-level pay to above $15 an hour, or at least at $15 an hour. And frankly, Charlotte Family Housing, we did the same thing last June in the midst of the pandemic. And I, as a nonprofit, knew my board would say, you have to raise the money to cover that increase. And I said, I understand that. But if we're going to talk about we want to help working families become self-sufficient, how can we not pay at the very minimum the current first step in the right direction towards a livable wage? And so we moved to $15 an hour. That is something employers can do on their own, which is open up the doors at the entry level to provide a living wage starting there, and also look very carefully at the salary compression issue and making sure that the bosses are not making 150,000% more than the entry level workers.
If I can weigh in on this, starting a home care cooperative and a child care cooperative, specifically that industry of low wage workers. One of the things that we did focus groups before we started, and one of the things that we kept hearing within this workforce is childcare, was huge because of the demand of around the clock and things of around the clock hours, and wages, right? So as a cooperative to listen, and we're driven by the voice of the workers, we raised our wages, right? Not only that, we have lived experience. So what we saw there is raising that wage over $17 an hour. However, they hit the benefit cliff, so it couldn't replace that. They couldn't afford the child care. So if you want to answer the question about what can we do with employers, we created an in-network child care system for our workforce because they couldn't afford childcare at the demand that they needed to work. So I do a lot of advocacy around that, is to say that, employers want to see the quality work. They want to see the retention, the opportunities for the advancement roles where they can hire internally from within. They need to invest in the childcare. And that's what we do, because even if you increase it to $15 an hour, $17 an hour, it does not help those families, especially in the healthcare and childcare industry, and the community as a whole. Whether you're working poor, poverty, you're middle class, you need the childcare and direct care. So my contribution to this would say that is how we can change the trajectory of lives, is to incentivize or something employers to offer childcare besides a tax credit.
Well, I'll stop there. This has been terrific. One observation: when we rose the minimum wage in the state of California, I was in the legislature because I was very involved in the California Restaurant Association, having owned restaurants. I heard from so many of my colleagues in that business 10 years ago, however long ago that was. And now they've all raised, most of them, in order to retain at least the middle and finer dining. They're struggling with their profit margins, but they're paying more than the $15 minimum wage, even though in California we don't have a tip provision, a sub minimum wage for that, which many states do. So it's interesting how quickly the world is changing. And very last point, Mr. Chairman, we've talked about this before, is just where the clients access the information is something we could really do. We've tried to do school-based. We've got workforce investment, one-stop, as my colleague said, centers. You could really be helpful in letting us know where's the best place for us to coordinate with nonprofits, the state and locals, and best models for that, so people get the information they need. Because I constantly hear constituents of mine in poor places in the Bay Area, like Richmond, the older folks just go to the county hospital almost irrespective of what their challenge is, and they'll ask their doctor, I can't afford housing. So then we've got to shift them over to the housing authority. So it's just interesting. If there was a one-stop sort of delivery system, it would be more helpful for families that are in crisis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As always, it's been terrific. I'll get the car keys later.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let me just make a few observations and ask some questions. I mean, as I said before, I mean, we have a system that is designed, to help people who are struggling in poverty, be able to put food on the table, be able to have shelter, be able to have access to childcare. But it works only if you stay poor. If you start to move, then, things begin to drop off. And, I mean, several of you talked about childcare. childcare is expensive. And so maybe, one of the questions is like, what should Congress know about the connection between childcare and a benefits cliff? And what ways will investing in childcare impact food security? And let me just add this other question onto that too, and we can just go around. Listening to all the testimony, again, it feels like the challenge is that there is a gap between poverty and the economic security of middle class, and which can only mean that the federal benefits are not creating a bridge to the middle class. So I just want to make sure that I'm right on that. And our federal benefits, which are critical and are helping people survive, stopping short of leading a family to the security of the middle class. Because I think, we have these crazy debates here in Congress when it comes to anti-poverty programs. We have some group of people that say, oh, it just creates a life of dependency, and I mean, to the extent it creates a life of dependency, it is because when people begin to get independent, they get punished, and it's that transition. But anyway, it's kind of a garbled couple of questions, but I just kind of go around. Maybe we can begin with, Ms. Allen and Dr. Burkin. We just kind of work our way around. You're on my screen here. Like the disadvantage I'm at is that it's like I have Hollywood Squares screen, and every time somebody talks, somebody moves. So I want to. That's the disadvantage of doing this by Zoom and not in person. But in any event, we'll go to everybody. But Ms. Allen, why don't we begin with you?
So yes, you were, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You were correct about there is no bridge between the gap from poverty. And one of the ways that we can take action is to, of course, childcare. I'm going to bring that back up because in order for childcare has been brought up over and over because individuals have to work multiple jobs if we don't make enough. They don't have the time mentally or physically to pursue educational because they're exhausted, right, in survival mode, or professional development to obtain a career that provides a living wage. So a lot of the times between if we were providing the childcare, increasing childcare subsidy, it would allow an individual to work enough to meet their family's needs, go to school, or pursue education and professional development while they're achieving that economic stability. I feel that you're correct. It is like a penalty when you do take a couple steps forward. You are told that, and this is from a lived experience, I was very confused about the system. I was told to, you can't work 40 hours because you are going to lose your childcare and you're going to lose food share. I didn't know what to do, right? I felt trapped. And so even when I decided to move past that, and those around me, it was just very challenging with the childcare, like to make sure my daughter didn't miss what she needed while I worked multiple jobs, especially for a single parent household. Childcare was just very important. So I'm sorry if there's a part of your question I didn't answer, please.
Thank you. I'll just call you Dr. Hoops.
Great, thank you. I love your questions and from the representative beforehand too. I think you're getting at what's really important. And so just a few pieces of information to add to your understanding. One is that about half the jobs, half the people working in the workforce today have the stability of a full-time salary job. Everybody else is working hourly paid or part-time. So that's been shifting for a while now. It didn't happen just during the pandemic. And as policymakers, I think that's an enormous difference in people's ability to provide a support for their family. During the pandemic, we had a big divide between essential and non-essential ALICE workers. Those who were essential had to work overtime, and those who were not essential were on the sidelines and trying to figure it out, and were it hit especially hard. So we don't have one experience happening, and you layer these different things on top of each other, and it makes it more complicated. So a couple resources that we have at United for Alice that might help with this is one, we have a full report called The Consequences of Insufficient Income. And Chairman McGovern, I think that that gets to your question about the connectivity, that if you don't have enough money for childcare, it has repercussions in terms of housing, job, long-term health and safety of your children. There's, you know, a lot of things that are connected and in a serious way. We also have our new report, The Pandemic Divide, that highlights some of these differences during the pandemic. So this is a long emerging trend that's been kind of accentuated with the pandemic. As you think about solutions, if the goal is to get people above the federal poverty level, it's not going to work. That's not financially stable there. You need to think bigger, a higher goal of, you know, that basic household survival budget, the Alice threshold, and I think that's what gets you to that bridge to the middle class. And then circling right back to food, where you all are starting, we work a lot with food banks and food pantries who tell us their first customer is Alice, that Alice isn't eligible for traditional food stamps and food programs. So they go to the food bank where they aren't asked about their income eligibility. And food banks have gotten really good at having the other support services there. So people from housing, people from childcare, and other nonprofits that can help. And most people, as you know very well from all your hearings, you know, aren't just suffering from food insecurity, that there's usually much more behind that. So that's why, and in fact, a food bank is the one who first coined the term about food insecurity being the canary in the coal mine for Alice.
Dr. Burkin.
Thank you for the question. In my opening remarks, I mentioned a true story, and indeed it was from a time when I served as Florida's child care state administrator and received that distressed call from a parent. And every part of my career up to that moment had been laser focused on improving child outcomes through thinking about quality early learning systems, and had that profound aha moment of this parent was going to face this big dilemma of advancing in her career or continuing to get her subsidy, and really the, you know, inextricable link to children's development from financial household stability is how I ended up in this world of benefits cliffs. And so really appreciate the question. You know, I also talked about the gaps in Florida between loss of childcare subsidies. So when you top out of eligibility, and the gap between that and when a family could afford childcare independently. In our analysis, 97% of the state's population, that would be 2-parent, 2-child households, live in communities where they would not be able to afford the cost of childcare. So this is a big issue. When we engage in community and state partnerships across the station, childcare is one of the top and first issues that really does present itself. When you think about household financial stability, you all asked about housing. Childcare is either the first or second cost center for that house. So for families with young children, this is an incredible cost that they've got to figure out how they can afford in order to really continue on and advance in their career and work towards economic self-sufficiency. And the last thing that I would note is sort of alluding back to my roots, it is a 2-generational strategy. So it is about supporting the workforce today, but it's also about supporting young children's development. So when we think about generational poverty, making sure children have the ability to enter kindergarten ready to go, hit 3rd grade reading strides. And so that added benefit of thinking about the role of childcare for families with young children is a really important consideration.
Thank you. Ms. Shulkoff.
Sure. I wanted to, I thought I'd give you the most additive by bringing it back to some of your comments around whether this was a disincentive to work. So it is a disincentive to work, but it's in the policy, not in the people. And I know that this is something you were sort of alluding to, but what's happening right now is the onus is on the individual, the public benefits recipient, who's simply working within the parameters defined by the policy. It's that these policies are designed for folks to survive in an emergency, but not actually move ahead. And so that missing piece is defining the pathway towards actually thriving. The words that we use a lot at Lead Fund are ambition, goals, thrive, because this is actually what people are focused on. What I've seen in talking to working Americans receiving public benefits are strategic decisions based on limited information that's been made available to them. From the public benefits recipients that we've talked to, there's not a single person who didn't want to work. It's that these benefits policies varied by benefit, and even within each benefit, it was very vague as to whether folks could expect to hit a benefits cliff. And it becomes this really punishing game of musical chairs where people are scrambling as they try to achieve what's ultimately their American dream. So specific to childcare, it's not just the loss of the benefit, it's also worth more than the dollar amount. This can pull someone out of work as they scramble to find a different childcare alternative. This can affect their ability to show up at work for weeks, months on end. This can put a strain on the family in multiple ways. So, you know, they can be searching for a new provider. This is really complicated and not just about dollars and cents. So all workers are strategic is the big point I wanted to get across here. Whether you're a CEO or a janitor, every worker is strategic. Everyone has to pay bills, raise kids, juggle different life priorities and ambitions.
Director Perez.
Yes, as I mentioned, my mother had to figure out how to educate herself while at the same time trying to work. So I was what was called a latchkey kid as a child, which meant that I spent most of my time by myself and my brother. In fact, I had to care for my brother when he was not in school before that. And then when I became school age, after school, was alone until my mother came home, not from work, because she went from work directly to educational programs. So she'd leave the house at 7 and sometimes wouldn't be back till 9. That meant that I had to learn how to cook, which she taught me, how to wash clothes, which she taught me, how to sew, how to iron, all the things necessary to make her life easier. Childcare is an essential part of what families do. Families all over the world want to come to America because they want to experience the American dream and provide their children with the opportunity to get some of the best education in the world. Look at what nations from around the world do with their children. They send them here because they know that the educational system here will allow those children to grow up to be adults that are successful. Why aren't we doing that for our working families that are experiencing poverty and homelessness and the working poor and the poor themselves? Childcare is the key for many families to succeed. And if there isn't childcare, then the parent cannot get educated. It's much more difficult, may not be able to get the right kind of job. So we really do have to provide that bridge. And part of the buttress of that bridge is childcare.
No, I appreciate that. Look, and I think this, again, reinforces the importance of looking at this issue more holistically, right? There's a lot of intersectionality here. And, you know, and I want to be honest with you. I mean, and this is one of the things that kind of bugs me is that because we don't here, you know, have a wider discussion on some of these matters, you know, people get stuck in their own little stereotypes. And so, you know, this culture of dependency, I mean, which really never existed anyway. I mean, the bottom line is the average family and person on food stamps SNAP is less than a year, right? I mean, and you know, I sit on the agriculture committee as well, the committee that oversees the SNAP program. During the last Farm Bill, I asked some of my colleagues who were critics of the SNAP program, we're the oversight committee, can you tell me what is the average SNAP benefit? Oh, it's enough. No, give me the number. Adequate. Now, that's a word. It's not a number, right? And I reminded them this was before the American Rescue Package and before the recent adjustment. It was about $1.40 per person per meal on average. My Dunkin' Donuts coffee costs more than that. And yet we have members of Congress who talk about this overly generous benefit. And then we have members on the Committee of Oversight who don't know how much the average SNAP benefit is. So people get locked into their little stereotypes. One thing that I think we have all learned on this committee as we've been doing this stuff is it is hard work to be poor in America. It's a full-time job and then some to try to navigate a very complicated system of benefits to see if you even qualify. Because by the way, there's a whole group of people out there that may qualify for something who don't even know they qualify, don't get it. And so, we need to rethink this because, and there's got to be a way for people of different politics to come together and be able to figure this out. Yeah, we need to help people, who quite frankly need these benefits. And we also need to make sure we're not doing anything to make it more difficult for them to be able to take a job that pays a little bit more. The other thing, I know we're talking about benefit cliffs, but I was in California, I was in San Francisco, I think it was in August, I can't remember. Time just goes by. And I was talking to a lot of people there about the fact that the cost of living in places like San Francisco or, New York City or Boston, I'm not sure what it is in everybody's cities who are on the call here today, but it's different from the cost of living, let's say, in Mitchell, South Dakota, right? Yet the criteria that decides whether you qualify, let's say, for SNAP, is the same. So you may be earning more in San Francisco, earning enough that it disqualifies you for the benefit, but your bills are such, and everything, the cost limit said is that you are, you are in just as bad a shape as that person, who may be living in Mitchell, South Dakota. And so there needs to be some acknowledgement, that, again, that this one glove fits all approach doesn't always work. There are people who are food insecure, who are nutrition insecure, who are making a wage. If we were in Mitchell, South Dakota, I hate to be picking on Mitchell, South Dakota, it just came to me, but I mean, that might be a livable wage, but in San Francisco, California, or New York City, or Boston, or whatever, it is not, right? And so we need to rethink these systems, and and again, I think a lot of you have been working on things that could be very informative as we look toward this White House conference about how we might rethink, not only how we deal with the benefit cliff, but how we rethink who is eligible for some of these benefits. And again, a lot of what we're talking about here are well-intentioned programs, but they haven't been thought out enough, in part because we don't always listen to people with lived experiences or with people who are, working with people who with lived experiences. And so there's a need to, I've always felt strongly that people with lived experience of food insecurity, need to be heard and need a place at the table, when we devise some of these programs. And I'm so grateful to all of you. Mr. Perez, and all of you, for sharing your personal experiences. I think it's important. I think the one thing that sometimes cuts through all the fog up here is a human story. It's harder for members of Congress to turn their backs. We're inundated with statistics, facts, and figures, which are incredibly important. We need them, right? but sometimes I worry we've lost our human ability to feel what they mean. But we need them, and we need the stories as well. But you know, I mean, and I know this has been going on for a while here, but let me ask all of you. I mean, what do you want Congress to know about families who struggle to be food secure? I mean, what are the most important things that you think can help families? I mean, some of you with lived experiences, what are the most important things that helped you when you were growing up, or most hindered your family's ability to be economically secure? I guess when we're thinking about, families that you're serving today, what are the top one or two things you believe could really help families in your community be more financially stable? If we're going to pick one or two things that if we could, I mean, obviously making sure that the child care benefit, and again, we may be doing that. I mean, I hope so. If we can get Congress to actually come together, and we actually might be doing something about making childcare more affordable for everybody. But by way of closing, I want to give you an opportunity just to kind of say what we haven't asked, what you think is really important to be on the record. And why don't we get it? You just all moved again. Okay. All right. So Dr. Hoops, we begin with you.
Great. Thank you, Chairman McGovern. I just wanted to reiterate that United for Alice does calculate the actual cost of living in every county in the country. So when you're talking about San Francisco and New York, we're able to calculate it's a lot more expensive to live there than in some of the places you were mentioning in South Dakota or Minnesota. But even within states, there's huge difference. So for a family of four in Maryland, it would cost $85,000 in Baltimore and $120,000 in Bethesda, a few miles away. So you have big variation in the cost of living on the ground, and those numbers were for a family of four with two in childcare. So it gets expensive. But it's the match with the wages in those areas too. And so we've found Alice in every single county in the country because there's always this mismatch between those basic costs and what wages pay. So some places the cost of living is very low and we're excited to get in there. And then we find that wages are low too, so that there are still Alice households. And so I think for Congress to recognize that families can be earning what seems like a lot, but it's not enough to be financially stable. It's not enough to be middle class. It's not enough to live the American dream. And then the second thing is it's really stressful not to be able to do that. That there's this belief in our country that if you work hard, you can support your family. So there's what's wrong with me that this isn't happening. And then to figure out, have to make some of these impossible choices between medication for a child or heat or childcare or to work. And so these are things that have a huge mental health toll, and all the statistics that Dr. Burkin and I can provide cannot convey that stress and that toll.
But we need the statistics too. They're very, very important. I mean, we need everything. Ms. Allen?
Thank you for Mr. Chairman. So I would say like the eligibility criteria, looking into expanding that for to decrease the benefit cliff as people increase wages. Not only that, but in relation to the cost of living in different locations. So that's where I think the greatest need could happen for childcare, food share, Medicaid.
Thank you. Dr. Burkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the couple points I might lift up, one would be very often when there are conversations around benefits cliffs, it's sort of in consideration of that one next wage increase or that next job. But part of the reason that we look over time is to really be able to look out and understand what are the implications of making choices between being a certified nursing assistant, a licensed practical nurse, or a registered nurse, right? What does that mean practically? They each have different incomes and you can project that over time, but where do those cliffs hit? What does that mean? And really beginning to understand and think about that so we can support career pathways for lower wage workers as they're working and choosing different careers and support them to economic self-sufficiency. The other point would be to pick back up on a point I made earlier, which is on looking at the interaction of these programs and understanding that they have different income qualification, different ways that you can define income, disregards, assets, and a change in one program could inadvertently change eligibility in another program. So really understanding how these interactions come together to either support economic mobility or potentially create unintended barriers would be the second thing that I would ask for consideration of going forward, just again, to make sure there's opportunity to support pathways to economic self-sufficiency.
Director Perez.
I want to thank you for your working on this. I want to thank you for your equitable lens that you have just talked about with respect to regional and individualness. We need to adjust these programs both regionally and individually. And fundamentally, childcare and healthcare ought to be universal. And because those are the two, in my opinion, the two critical things that allow a family to be socially and economically mobile. And when we're talking about childcare, it's not merely preschool, it's also after-school programs. As a teenager, if I did not have an after-school program, I'm going to end up on the streets. I luckily was involved in martial arts my entire life, so I directed my energy in that. My brother did not have that opportunity, and sadly, he did not make it out of poverty. In fact, his choices led him to his death. And lots of teenage children engage in activities because they don't have educational programs after school. They don't get support, particularly in those communities that were previously redlined, but still suffer from the consequences of redlining communities. Thank you.
Ms. Shulkoff.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for inviting all of us to talk with you on what we are spending our life's work in doing. I really appreciate it. I would plus one Dr. Burkin's recommendation around the interactions of benefits. This is a critical piece of better understanding how to tackle this issue. And secondly, I'd urge a shifting in the frame of reference. So here at Leave Fund, we believe everyone receives benefits from every income bracket and corporations too. So we view both SNAP and the mortgage tax credit as government benefits. There's just different ways to access them and different stigma or not stigma attached to them. So when I see in middle and high income brackets is the ability to consult a financial advisor or wealth asset manager on managing one's own income and benefits to ensure benefits provided by your employer, to ensure that the decisions that you're making are optimized in the most beneficial way. I would urge you to question how this is any different from the strategic decisions people are making with income and public benefits. The difference in these policies is around the trust that's built into the regulations. For middle and high income earners, it's high trust and believing best intentions. And also for corporations, but for low income earners, it's low trust and designed for the worst actors. This is how inequality is built into and codified into the policies. And in visiting this issue holistically, there's a real opportunity to ensure that these inequalities are reconsidered. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I really like that reframing of of how we talk about this. I mean, the bottom line is, yeah, you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, you get lots of benefits. In fact, some of them get so many benefits they don't even pay any taxes, and those benefits help them make more and more and more and more money, which they don't, doesn't trickle down to the people who need it the most. And then the benefits for those who are struggling in poverty, again, the way the system is constructed is not designed in a way to help make the transition from poverty to middle class easy. In fact, in some cases, there are disincentives in the way the benefits are structured. I talked about the dysfunctionality of kind of the way kind of Congress is set up in our committee system, where the issues involving the topic we're discussing here today fall under multiple jurisdictions. So we don't all sit and have these kind of conversations like we're having today, which I think is really, really important, because we're looking at this, with a wider lens. The same is true in terms of that dysfunctionality in our agencies. The topics we're talking about here today don't fall under just USDA. They fall under housing. They fall under health and human services. They fall, education and labor, right? And yet, the way the system is set up, those departments don't get together on a regular basis and say, okay, let's tackle the issue of hunger, or let's tackle the issue of whatever. They do their piece, but it's not always very, very coordinated. And so that's why, we want this White House conference. We have had conversations with almost every member of the Biden cabinet. When I talked to Secretary Vilsack at USDA, he understood, yep, I'm with you. We got to do more because they oversee the SNAP program. I talked to Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg. He's like, well, where does transportation fit into this? Well, it's a big deal. Access to and from places, getting food to people who are in areas where it's not easily accessible to get access to nutritional food. Refrigerated trucks, we can go right down the list. We have a huge list for the Secretary of Transportation. And he said, okay, yeah, well, then count me in. Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. Well, Department of Energy. Climate change, that's a big one. But putting that aside, utility bills. You're from New England, we get cold winters. You're from, I was out in Arizona and parts of California where it was hot. They said it was dry heat, whatever that means. They have air conditioning bills. All right. Those utility bills cut into people's food budgets. Right. And so there's a relationship there. I go right down the list. Veterans Agency, Department of Defense. So we need everybody in a room to figure this out. Look, what we're talking about is the American dream, right? And which unfortunately is out of reach for too many in this country. And we all talk about ladders of opportunity. That's one of our favorite buzz phrases up here. But opportunity can't be reserved for only the fortunate few, right? All of us deserve opportunity to achieve our dreams and our goals. And I think that's what we're all talking about here today. How do we make it so that you can easily, be able to achieve what you want? And this project that we're doing here has never been about only food. The food is what has kind of pushed us into this. It's about all of us being economically secure, so that we and our kids can thrive. People are food insecure because they don't have access or they can't afford nutritious food. It's that simple. And so we're about trying to figure out how do we solve that problem. And I tell people all the time that hunger is a political condition. We've got the money. God knows we got the money. And look at the defense budget. Look at the tax breaks we give to big corporations. We got the money. We've got the food. We're not, in the middle of the Sahara Desert. We're growing food. We have the food. We have the infrastructure. We have we know what we need to do. We have everything but the political will. And so, what we're trying to do with these hearings, and then ultimately with the White House conference, is to generate the political will to do it. I'll just leave you with this. The last time the White House ever did a conference on anything related to this topic was in 1969. Think about it. And people say, well, what the hell happened in that conference? Well, WIC came out of that conference. enhancements in the then food stamp, now SNAP program, more attention to school nutrition. And, we began to make a lot of progress in the 1970s, which got kind of reversed in the 1980s. And when people tell me, oh, well, the pandemic is almost over, so we'll be back to normal. Well, we had a problem before the pandemic. And going back to normal in the case of hunger is living with 35 to 37 million people who don't know the next meal is going to come from, which is just shameful in the richest country in the history of the world. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of this discussion, and I hope that you will work with us. We're hoping to get the White House to say yes soon. That our next thing is to give you to the White House so that you can help develop some of the agenda on how we address, the benefits cliff. I mean, how can we do, and getting people to think a little bit bigger and out of the box. There are a lot of people who are sympathetic to a lot of what we're talking about here today, whose attitude is don't touch any of these programs. Don't touch them. If you touch them, open it up and, well, we need to get them to work better. So we do need to touch them, and touching them and making them better is not the same as saying we want to cut them or eliminate them. No, we want to make them more flexible, and we want to make them more useful to people as they try to fulfill their career goals. And so this has been very, very helpful. And I thank you all for your time. And you haven't seen the last of us, so we will be in touch. All right, be safe, everybody. The Rules Committee will adjourn.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.